flood insurance. Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
From Orange County, California.
I got something here. I got something better for you. Look at this. How about puka shell? I haven't had them off for 20 years. There you go.
When he first got elected to Congress, he was known as a surfing congressman. Dana Rohrabacher from Orange County, Huntington Beach area of California.
Yeah.
Congressman Rohrabacher, 5 pages of this 20-page speech spent on foreign policy. I know it's an area that you're often involved in.
Yeah, I think that the president, by focusing on Iran, I think that he was mistaken to compare it to the Reagan years. I mean, there was substance and there was give and take on both sides when Ronald Reagan signed an agreement. In fact, he turned down a lot of agreements that were just fluff and basically PR-oriented treaties. And so tonight, when he started talking about that agreement with the mullah regime in Iran, I sort of winced when he tried to compare it to what Ronald Reagan did. I mean, after all, in this agreement with the mullahs, we're giving up something we put in place for years, this economic sanctions. We're giving that up. We're dismantling that, and they're giving up nothing. They're going to refrain from doing something in the future if we give up something now. No. They should be dismantling some of their nuclear facilities right now, some of the equipment they need, the centrifuges now, if we're going to dismantle our economic sanctions. So yeah, I didn't think that was that didn't endear me to the president and give me confidence in his leadership.
As somebody who used to write speeches for Ronald Reagan, what did you think of the overall text?
I thought that the president's speech tonight, and he came down, and as he came down, I just happened to be sitting there, and he shook my hand. I said, "Good job, Mr. President," and it was a good job in his delivery and his tone. Unfortunately, the substance was about as arrogant and belligerent as any speech that I've ever heard given by a president to Congress. He was basically saying, you either do it or I'm going to do it on my own. It's my way or the highway. And, you know, I don't care. Does the president really have authority without Congress to do all these things, raise the minimum wage? I thought we lived in a society where there was our fathers who wrote the Constitution gave the power to the legislative branch and the executive branch, not just the executive branch. So I thought that the tone, well, the good delivery that he did sort of masked the belligerent message.
State of the Union speech, I felt like I was watching another rerun of one of my favorite movies, Groundhog Day, with Bill Murray. Of course, we all remember that movie. Bill Murray, the principal character, relives exactly the same 24 hours over and over and over again. And of course, that's what the President's State of the Union reminded me of, because really what we heard is a replay of a lot of the ideas we've heard in previous State of the Union speeches. But unfortunately, the President's speech and his claims in many respects did not reflect the reality of for most people. But it's apparent that the President hasn't changed in this respect. He still thinks that slow economic growth and high unemployment, that the answer to that is more government spending and more government control over the economy. And I would say in the debates we have had in this chamber and elsewhere, and that Americans have had throughout the course of our history since our country's founding about the size and the role of federal government, usually we end up debating philosophy, ideology, and theory, but the last 5 years have given us the proof we need that big government doesn't work. That does not to deny people don't have the best of intentions, but we know that promise after promise has been made, whether it's for the $1 trillion stimulus, what it would do to unemployment. The President later said in a moment of candor, he said, well, I guess shovel-ready wasn't all that shovel-ready. Nancy Pelosi talked about timely, targeted, and temporary stimulus. And again, this is borrowed money. This is money we didn't have, which is added to our debt, which simply didn't work. And then, of course, there is the example of Obamacare. But let's just review. For the last 5 years, the President pushed through this $1 trillion stimulus, a $1.8 trillion health care law, a $1.7 trillion increase in new taxes, and about $0.5 trillion in new regulation. That's what happens, for example, when I go home to Texas and my community bankers and credit unions will say, well, we've hired new people, but the people we've hired are the ones to fill out the paperwork that are required by the new regulations that are the result of Dodd-Frank. Another example of where Wall Street perhaps was the target, but Main Street was the collateral damage. And so all these new regulations have a cost to them, because businesses, if they're going to be in business, are going to have to hire people to comply with those regulations. But that doesn't help grow the economy. That doesn't help make us more productive. That doesn't put as many people back to work as we would hope to be going back to work in productive jobs. But let's consider some of the results of some of these items: the stimulus, the health care bill, the new regulations, and new taxes. Well, between 2009 and 2013, we've seen median household income fall by more than $2,500. So that's $2,500 less than an average family has to spend on everything from food to their heating or air conditioning bill, you name it, $2,500 less. And then we know that the labor participation rate, that's a fancy name for the number of people, actually the percentage of people in the workforce, that has fallen to a 3-decade low. It's fallen by 3 percentage points since 2009, meaning that even fewer people, much fewer people, or many fewer people, I guess I should say, are actually in the workforce looking for work. And if they were still in the workforce looking for work, the unemployment rate would actually be much higher. But they aren't counted once they drop out of the workforce. And then we know that long-term unemployment has increased dramatically as a total share of unemployment. Of course, all of this happened after the recession was over. You know, the technical definition of a recession, I believe, is 2 consecutive terms of negative economic growth. But amazingly, a poll conducted just last week reflected that 74% of the respondents thought that we were still in a recession. So whether or not it's a technical recession or not, people still feel like we're in one. And that's a remarkable number and an unfortunate but yet scathing indictment of the President's economic policies, which have not delivered what he hoped and had promised to deliver. So what's the big idea that the President has to solve this problem or to address these concerns of average, hardworking American families? Well, here's the big idea. Let's raise the minimum wage. Well, superficially, I admit raising the minimum wage has some appeal, but the fact of the matter is, when employers have to pay more for their workers, overall, that's less money to hire new people. And so one study estimated that raising the minimum wage to $9.50 an hour, that's less than the $10.10 that the President has proposed, would destroy no fewer than 468,000 jobs. So just think of it. You have some money which to hire people, but rather than hire more people, the government sets the wages, meaning you can't hire these other people. So that's how it has a either-or effect in terms of jobs. One study calculated that raising the minimum wage to $10 an hour could potentially destroy as many as 2.3 million jobs. Now, the President chose to ignore this reality last night in his speech. He was eloquent, as always, gives a great speech, but he said once again, or reiterated once again, where he can't get what he wants from Congress, he's prepared to go it alone. So last night he said that he was going to issue an executive order giving a 40% pay raise to federal contractors, even though the White House cannot tell us today how many workers would actually be affected, because they don't know. But who's going to end up paying more? Well, the federal government. So we're talking about raising spending by the federal government by 40% for these federal contractors. Somebody's got to pay that money. So it's either going to be the taxpayers or it's going to be added to our deficits and debt. Well, Mr. President, I don't want to be a wet blanket, so let me end on a more positive note, something that we could actually do together that would actually make a difference on those long-term unemployed, on people stuck in jobs that are dead-end or which they are frustrated with because they're not able to earn the income they want to provide for their family and to live their dream. Well, one of the debates we should have had earlier, but for the majority leader denying us an opportunity to offer any amendments and debate and vote on the unemployment insurance extension, but I suppose we'll see that again. One of the debates we did not have and should have had is how can we help people learn the skills they need in order to qualify for the good high-paying jobs that exist. But there's not enough trained workforce with the skills they need in order to qualify for those good high-paying jobs. Well, we know there are a lot of workforce training initiatives. Our friend and colleague from Oklahoma tells us that there's some 40 different worker training programs, and he's proposed they ought to be consolidated and perhaps streamlined so that more of that money could be focused on giving people the education and the tools they need in order to qualify for these good jobs. But what I saw is a glimpse of what could happen, and thankfully is happening, back in Houston, Texas, at San Jacinto College, where I had the opportunity to meet some of these inspiring Texans, people who are pursuing their dream. Well, I met an Iraq War veteran named Jordan Chauvet, who went back to school with the help of the Hazelwood Act. Now, the Hazelwood Act is a state law that provides tuition benefits to veterans and their families. His goal was to learn the skills that he would need in order to live a better life, earn a better income for his wife and his family. He recently graduated from San Jacinto College and now is working at an engineering and construction company based in the city of La Porte. By the way, I might interject, Mr. President, one of the reasons why there is so much construction and manufacturing and an economic boom taking place in this part of our state is because of the shale gas revolution. This is where one of the brightest spots in our economy, our energy sector, domestic energy production, producing cleaner natural gas, the President talked about that a little bit last night, that is creating these manufacturing jobs because natural gas happens to be the feedstock necessary for the petrochemical industry. And so many of the jobs that exist that need these technical skills are the sorts of jobs these young men and women are training for at San Jacinto College. So everything's connected to everything else, but this is how domestic energy production, some of which the President talked about last night, is so important in terms of bringing that manufacturing back on shore. And then we need to have the job training to teach people the skills they need in order to qualify for these good, high-paying jobs. Take the case of Deanna Harper, who received a cosmetology degree from San Jacinto and then went back to school and got a degree in something called process technology. Now, I don't pretend to understand everything that process technology involves. All I know is she's a wife and a mother, and she's now earning a six-figure salary working in the energy industry. It's a terrific story. I remember a few years ago in Amarillo, Texas, meeting a young Hispanic woman, a single mother, working, she had been working as a prison guard in Amarillo, Texas, a dangerous, tough job. But thanks to the degree she got at Amarillo Community College, she was able to go to work on the V-22 Osprey assembly line, making, I believe it was well in excess of somewhere on the order of $25 an hour, and with a great career ahead of her. So what it took is the opportunity for her to go back to school and learn those skills, match those skills with a job, and lift herself up by her own bootstraps. Well, like so many other Texans, Jordan and Deanna and this young woman I mentioned from Amarillo have benefited from the recent surge of private investment into petrochemicals and manufacturing. And I mentioned why that is a moment ago. But the skills that they acquired and the job training they had at San Jacinto prepared them not just for a good job, but for an upwardly mobile career in a fast-growing industry. At a time of stubbornly high national unemployment and people giving up and dropping out of the workforce, we should be doing everything we possibly can to ensure that such jobs and careers are available to all Americans who want them. In that sense, we should be doing everything possible to bring this sort of example to Washington, D.C. and to spread it nationally. But the truth is, there's stories like this occurring everywhere. But there's more we could do, and certainly one of the things we could do is take up one of the suggestions of our friend from Oklahoma when he talks about the duplication and the waste and the inefficiency built into our job training programs, and to make them more efficient, to make them more streamlined, and to deliver better value to the people who need that training so they can qualify for these kinds of good, high-paying jobs. That is a much better idea than the federal government trying to make a political fix by fixing wages between an employer and a worker that artificially elevate those wages beyond what the market will bear, and in the process limit the number of new people that that employer can hire. So these are just some of the ideas that I think any reasonable person would say that, you know, that's not completely over the top. That's not a crazy idea. That's kind of makes sense. But that's exactly the sort of debate we are not having as a result of the restrictive way under which the majority leader is letting us take up consideration of some of this legislation, from the unemployment insurance bill, and I predict soon he will bring in a minimum wage increase bill to the floor. And the question is he going to allow this side of the aisle and the Democratic side of the aisle too? When he cuts off amendments from the floor of the Senate, it doesn't just hurt the minority. We don't like it, but it doesn't just hurt us. It hurts our friends on the other side of the aisle, because they're not allowed to offer their constructive suggestions for what could improve the legislation. And I thought that's what we're here for, to try to produce the best product we can for the American people right here on the floor. And we don't do it by writing bills in the majority leader's conference room, bringing them out here, and then trying to shove them on through. That's why we have the debate and the checks and balances and the deliberative process we have here in the Senate. But that's what we have not been having. But I just wanted to raise a few examples of what we could be doing that would be enormously constructive and would help a lot of these struggling workers during a time of high unemployment and low labor participation, help them get back on track. Well, Mr. President, I came away from that experience at San Jacinto College rejuvenated and encouraged that there is a lot we can do. We do know that people don't want to collect unemployment. Now, maybe some do, but most people, the vast majority of people, want a job. Again, to repeat what the President last night, he talked about the dignity of work. That's what the vast majority of people want. They want a good job. And if we give them the opportunity to learn the skills, and we give them a growing economy that's creating jobs, not fewer jobs, then they will be able to find that. So I came away even more committed to adopting pro-growth economic policies that will make it easier for all Americans to find work when they finish school. And I would just close on this note. I know the President, last night, the press leading into the President's speech last night, it sounded like it was going to be a whole lot more, I'm going to go it alone. But he did at least offer an olive branch of trying to do things constructively in the legislative branch, recognizing that our Constitution doesn't authorize the executive to do this all by himself. That's what checks and balances are all about. And that's what doesn't happen when he tries to, quote, go it alone. And there's danger in trying to go it alone when things are poorly thought out and rammed through without adequate deliberation. But there is one area where the President can use that phone and that pen that he talked about. He could use that pen to sign the authorization for the Keystone XL pipeline, to connect the pipeline to Canadian oil reserves that would extend from Canada all the way through the United States down to Port Arthur, Texas, down in what we call the Golden Triangle, where we have a lot of refineries that would turn that crude oil into jet fuel and gasoline. In the process, a lot of jobs would be created. And for those of my friends who they say, oh my gosh, we can't build another pipeline, well, I would invite them to go on Google or Bing or any other search engine and just type in oil and gas pipelines and just see what they get. You will be astonished at the number of pipelines that crisscross this country and that safely transmit their product without our even knowing about it, by and large. And I realize occasionally there are accidents, and those are to be deplored and regretted, and we should try to prevent those. But the idea should not be to cut our nose off to spite our face and deny ourselves this safe source of energy from a friendly country like Canada, so we don't have to get it from dangerous, volatile regions of the world, and also to take with it the jobs that are created as a result of this great renaissance in American and North American energy. So I'd say to the President, in conclusion, after listening to him last night, trying to listen to his words, I would say look at the states that have actually are the successful laboratories of democracy. That's the phrase that Louis Brandeis coined, to say that's the great thing about our federal system, where we have 50 states that are sovereign. They conduct their own business subject to those matters that are delegated to the federal government under the Constitution. But the states are a great place to see what works and what doesn't work. And I might add the two lowest unemployment rates in the United States are Bismarck, North Dakota, and Midland, Texas, not unrelated to the shale gas renaissance that I mentioned a moment ago. But we ought to look at what works, from the tax code to making it less burdensome, more logical, and more conducive to economic growth. And we need to take a look at how do we address the unkept promises of things like Obamacare, which have created uncertainty and increased cost and a lot of disruption in the lives of Americans, and replace it with patient-centered reforms that actually reduce the cost, expand quality coverage, and improve access to care. I believe that's the kind of debate we ought to be having, and that's the type of agenda the American people are asking for and the type of agenda they deserve. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I come today before the Senate to speak on the importance of passing the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act. I'm a co-sponsor of this legislation because without it, millions of homeowners across the country will see significant increases in their flood insurance premiums. Homeowners insurance protects a family's investment from damages and losses that come as a result of accidents or tornadoes or burglaries, but that same homeowner's policy, as we all know, does not cover damage resulting from flooding. Sadly, too many Americans learn of this gap in their policy after it is too late. In recognition of this major gap in coverage, Congress created the National Flood Insurance Program in 1968 to give homeowners and businesses protection in the event of a flood. And this program has helped them to protect their property, their families, and their livelihoods. All regions of America are susceptible to flooding. We see it with seasonal rains, hurricanes, and thunderstorms, and it's a powerful force of nature that we cannot escape. When you have flood insurance, you have the peace of mind that the tools you have to rebuild will be there for you. For Minnesotans who live in areas susceptible to flooding, the flood insurance program is absolutely vital. Each spring in northwestern Minnesota, we know that the Red River of the North will top its banks and the floodwaters will threaten Moorhead, Minnesota, and Fargo, North Dakota. Leading up to the flood event last spring, I visited the region twice to watch the flood preparation, to urge on our volunteers to ensure that the residents were receiving the federal assistance and cooperation that they needed. Just as I have seen each and every year since 2007, I saw once again how hard friends and neighbors work to prepare for the potential flood. These people aren't idly sitting by. In fact, I would bet that in towns that are in other areas of the country, if the kinds of floods that they faced in certain of the years in the last decade had come to other towns, I'm not sure they would have been saved. In this case, the residents of Moorhead and Fargo incessantly would create sandbags. They had huge warehouses filled with volunteers, everything from teenagers to seniors to inmates would be stuffing those bags full of sand. Residents fought heroically to save not only their homes but their businesses and their families. Across the Red River, we always say that the rising river doesn't divide the two states of Minnesota and North Dakota, it unites us. This is not the first time the Red River has risen, and it certainly won't be the last. As honorable, tireless, and commendable as these efforts are, homeowners can't do it alone, and they deserve our help. That is why we need a national flood insurance program that offers affordable premiums for homeowners who are trying to do the right thing. And I would say, Mr. President, that on the Minnesota side, many, many homeowners have relocated. Dozens and dozens, and in fact across our state, hundreds of houses have literally been moved or been destroyed because they are too close to flooded areas. But still the need for flood insurance remains. So what are these people seeing? FEMA is increasing premiums to levels that do not fairly reflect the risk associated with the flood coverage that is being provided. The consequences of these increases can't be understated. 1.1 million homes and businesses across the country that were built before FEMA published a flood map of their community that now might be able to sell their property. Another 2.9 million homes and business owners across the country who have followed the rules but were remapped into a higher risk area are now seeing significant spikes in their premiums. Rate increases are not just numbers. They can have substantial impacts on real families and even price them out of their homes. Sharp increases in premiums are devastating for a place like Roseau, Minnesota, where 75% of the homes are located in the floodplain. One Roseau resident who recently wanted to purchase flood insurance for a home valued at $75,000 was shocked with the changes in the premiums. This individual's new annual policy would cost $3,726, not the $985 it had been previously. That's nearly 4 times as much. And that is sticker shock. And when calculated for 30 years, the length of a typical home loan, the flood policy on that $75,000 home would cost more than $110,000 more than the value of the home itself. Crookston, Minnesota residents are similarly seeing premiums they can't afford. One resident who recently purchased a home for around $100,000 was stunned to learn his annual flood insurance program would be $5,800, not the $800 he had anticipated based on the past. This isn't the way the National Flood Insurance Program is supposed to work. Our National Flood Insurance Program should provide peace of mind, but instead these changes create a disincentive for families and businesses in flood-prone areas to do the right thing. Roseau recovered from a flood in 2002 that caused widespread damage and is working on permanent flood protection to reduce the flood stages in the city. Once complete, the project will include a restriction structure to remove the city from the 100-year regulatory floodplain and reduce future flood damages by nearly 86%. It makes no sense that FEMA would be pushing these premium increases on consumers before the congressionally required study on affordability has even begun. The bill that the Senate is considering today and that I supports these priorities. It stops the proposed rate increases until the affordability study is done and the flood maps being used are verified as being accurate. And only after all of this critical information is reviewed should FEMA move forward and consider the cost of premiums that encourage participation in the flood insurance program while ensuring its long-term stability. The National Flood Insurance Program has given protection to homeowners and businesses from catastrophic flood losses for more than 45 years. We shouldn't hit them now with an outrageous premium increase. I commend Senators Menendez, Isaacson, and Landrieu on their great work on this legislation and urge my colleagues to support it. Now, Mr. President, I'd like to discuss another critical priority for my home state of Minnesota, and that is the Farm Bill. I rise today to speak in support of the Farm Bill Conference Agreement. I was a member of the conference committee, and this bill is good for farmers, it's good for rural economies, and it's good for taxpayers, which the House recognized earlier today when they voted to pass the Farm Bill by a strong vote of 251 to 166. Now it's the Senate's turn to pass this critical legislation and get it to the President's desk as soon as possible. I would like to thank Chairwoman Stabenow for her determination to get us to this point. She has been tireless in her advocacy for America's farmers and ranchers and has made it a priority to work in a bipartisan way with Ranking Member Cochran to put together a farm bill that strengthens the safety net for our nation's family farmers and ranchers and preserves critical food and nutrition programs and brings down the deficit. Senator Stabenow couldn't have been a better partner in this effort, and the same goes for Senator Cochran. I greatly appreciate the expertise that they both bring to agriculture policy, and I thank them for their leadership. I also want to thank the ranking member of the House Agriculture, Colin Peterson. No one knows more about agriculture than Colin Peterson, who serves as a representative from my state. He has the longest district in the United States of America, stretching literally from the Canadian border nearly down to the Iowa border. I guess that's why he flies his own plane, Mr. President, when he visits the town. There is no other way to visit many places in one day. It's been a privilege for me to work with Congressman Peterson on this issue. It's the second farm bill we've worked on together. I also want to thank my other Congressman, Tim Walz, for his service on the conference committee. We worked hard to make sure this bill is strong for our country, for our state, and for the people of America. Farmers, ranchers, and rural communities in Minnesota have been waiting for this farm bill for more than 2 years. It's a good bill for our state, and it's a good bill for the country. It provides the certainty family farmers need to succeed and thrive, and that's why it has the strong support of both the National Farmers Union and the American Farm Bureau. That's not to say that everyone got everything they want in this bill. Some concerns remain about potentially retaliatory actions regarding exports. As a senator from the state that is first in turkey, second in pork, and sixth in agriculture exports, I will continue to work with the administration and producers to ensure that our agriculture policies are implemented in a manner that avoid potential disruptions and ensure agriculture exports remain an American success story. As a member of the conference committee, I worked with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, in the House and the Senate, to build on the strong farm bill that the Senate passed just last year. In the conference report, we first of all eliminated direct payments and transitioned to crop insurance to help manage risk. We provided $880 million in mandatory funding to promote homegrown energy. We maintained the successful sugar program that is so important to the sugar beet producers in the Red River Valley. We reduced the deficit by $23 billion, making this important bill for all Americans. We kept nutrition programs strong for Minnesota families. We provided permanent disaster relief for our nation's livestock producers. We streamlined the conservation programs and still managed to come out with a pro-conservation bill that is supported by environmental and conservation groups across the country. I wanted to focus on the disaster provisions of the bill, Mr. President. The disaster provisions are all the more critical when we consider just how much our farmers and ranchers have been through recently. The worst drought since 1956, a devastating blizzard that killed thousands of cattle in my neighboring state of South Dakota, a wet spring that led to a shortage of alfalfa that hurt beef and dairy producers in Minnesota. In this farm bill, we ensure that permanent disaster relief will be there for livestock producers that were left stranded when the farm bill expired last September. And this assistance will be there for producers when they face the next disaster. The farm bill also includes an amendment that I led with Senators Hoeven and Heitkamp that addresses critical priorities by providing an additional $300 million, and this came out of our committee in the Senate before we passed it in the Senate, $300 million to boost agriculture research, address the backlog of water and wastewater projects, and support energy projects in rural areas. The amendment also supported funding for conservation projects that can help reduce flooding while protecting wildlife habitat. The Farm Bill authorizes a joint study by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Transportation to examine rural transportation issues, including captive shipping, something that I pushed for, seeing what I'm seeing with some of our producers, agriculture producers, with our manufacturers that are at the end of the line and are finding that they don't really have a lot of choice over what rail rates are for that last leg, and many times are being charged outrageously high rates, which makes it difficult for them to produce goods. Today, families and farmers are facing a severe propane shortage in my state, Mr. President. I believe that it is more important than ever that we understand the vulnerabilities and shortcomings of our transportation infrastructure so we can ensure that the fuels we need to keep our homes and barns warm are available and affordable. I fought to include each of these provisions because I believe that if we want to recruit a new generation of farmers and ranchers, then we must take actions that will improve the quality of life in rural communities. That's why I authored a number of the provisions specifically to recruit beginning farmers and ranchers. The first would reduce the cost of crop insurance for beginning farmers by 10%. The second would make it easier for beginning producers to graze livestock on conservation reserve programs. In this bill, we put in place a new dairy program that helps dairy farmers in Minnesota and across the country that have struggled with prices, with feed costs, and we have seen probably that sector of the agriculture community hit harder than any other. You know, crops have had their droughts. We've seen wet springs that have hurt many of our farmers. We've seen the blizzard I mentioned in South Dakota that killed our cattle. We've seen trade barriers put up in other countries that shut down the markets. But I would still say the hardest hit of any sector of our agriculture economy in the last few years has been our dairy producers, specifically our small dairy producers, which if anyone has driven through the back roads of Minnesota or Wisconsin understand how important that is to our economy and our way of life. And while this compromise wasn't exactly the deal we'd reached in the Senate, it is still a strong deal. It still contains new protections for our dairy farmers, and I want to thank specifically Colin Peterson for his leadership in being the architect of this change, as well as the work in the Senate by specifically Senator Leahy and Senator Stabenow. The Farm Bill, as I mentioned, also streamlines conservation programs from 23 to 13, including the provisions that I worked on to help communities in the Red River Valley address flooding. It extends conservation compliance rules to the crop insurance program, something that came out of the Senate bill. And it also includes the sod saver provision that I worked with Senator Thune of South Dakota, that for 5 or 6 states, really including the prairie pothole states. I don't think, Mr. President, that would include Delaware, that it protects native lands, native prairie, and helps again to preserve our conservation efforts for hunting and for our way of life, particularly in the upper Midwest. These critical provisions with the conservation compliance and our sod saver amendment are the reason the bill is supported by wildlife organizations, including Ducks Unlimited and Pheasants Forever, and environmental groups like the National Resources Defense Council and the Nature Conservancy. Mr. President, I believe that we do right by ourselves when we work to strengthen the farms and the rural communities that sustain us every day. Our prosperity depends on it, and this Farm Bill helps us to do just that. I urge my colleagues to support this very important bipartisan Farm Bill. Thank you. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
We just heard Senator Klobuchar talking about the Farm Bill. Here's how the Associated Press is writing about it. After years of setbacks, a nearly $100 billion year compromise Farm Bill cleared the House today, despite strong opposition from conservatives who sought a bigger cut in food stamps. The 5-year bill, which preserves generous crop subsidies, heads to the Senate, where approval seems certain. And the White House has said President Obama would sign it. That in the Associated Press. Up to 4 votes are expected here in the Senate shortly on amendments to a bill that makes changes to the 2012 National Flood Insurance Law. Those votes happening at about 4:45 Eastern Time, about 40 minutes from now. Then we expect up to 5 hours of debate on the bill before a vote on final passage.
President.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask proceedings under the quorum call be issued.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about a bill introduced today, a bipartisan bill, a bill that will strengthen America's innovation economy. Over the last 60 years, our national laboratories have served as leading centers of research and discovery in America. Today, in fact, we have 17 DOE labs charged with 3 broad research missions: science, energy, and national security. And although they've grown and changed since their founding to encompass much broader ranges of work and are successful in carrying out their primary missions, the labs are not fully optimized to take part in today's innovation culture. That's a problem, because in this century of rapid change, America's best competitive advantage remains our capacity to innovate. So over the coming months, I'll be talking about a few things that Congress can do in a bipartisan way to streamline and jumpstart our nation's hubs of discovery so that we can thrive as a 21st century innovation economy. The top level, it'll mean working together to reauthorize the America Competes Act, which would reaffirm our commitment to the robust national strategy for science and technology programs that will continue to be a critical underpinning of America's prosperity. One part of how that can be achieved is how our national labs operate, and a bill that will make our national labs operate more effectively has been introduced today by Senator Rubio, Florida, and myself, and it's the America Innovates Act. Already, our labs have incubated many groundbreaking innovations over their long and storied history. Their research has led to breakthrough from, for example, in the healthcare field, new melanoma and HIV/AIDS treatments, to in the national security field, special IED detonators that have saved the lives of our troops in combat. That research is critical because although the private sector will continue to be a key source of investment and innovation, the federal government has and will continue to play a central role in advancing basic science, research, and innovation as well. Well, why is that? Private markets, historically speaking, tend to underinvest in R&D relative to the potential benefits to society. And this is especially true where basic science is most relevant, and is particularly true in the energy sector. But if there's a problem I've heard about since coming to Congress in this field, it's that too often the great work of scientists in our national labs just don't get translated to the marketplace. That we as a nation, as a people, don't benefit from the remarkable discoveries and inventions being made in our 17 national labs. Right now, too much groundbreaking science and too many innovative ideas never leave the walls of our national labs, squandering enormous potential for our people, our country, and the commercial marketplace. So in this bill today, introduced with Senator Rubio of Florida, we continue to support our lab's core missions. We're not proposing anything drastic. What we are doing instead is modernizing these labs for the 21st century so that ideas developed in the lab can more effectively become innovations in the marketplace. Fortunately, we need only look to the labs themselves for inspiration on how to do this. So we make 2 broad proposals. First, we're integrating the management of the Department of Energy's science and energy programs to improve linkages between basic and applied science. This will allow the early stages of research and development to be translated more efficiently, and it's something that Department of Energy Secretary Moniz has signaled he supports and is going to move forward with. Second, we're giving the national labs more power to work with the private sector to ensure that more scientific discoveries turn into commercial breakthroughs. Together, these 2 steps would allow us to streamline the lab's work so it can more quickly and effectively translate into the transformative innovations that can create jobs and grow our economy. Now, to explain what our proposals actually might achieve, let me walk through what is broadly known as the innovation pipeline, which shows how basic science research ultimately becomes a deployed, world-changing innovation. First, I'll use the example of the great work scientists at the Natural Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, in Golden, Colorado, are doing to advance cellulosic ethanol technologies. One of our country's big challenges today is reducing our dependence on foreign oil. And to do that, we need new fuel options that we can create or grow here in America. Cellulosic ethanol is an advanced biofuel with a great deal of promise, because it's produced from abundant and renewable materials like grasses and wood chips, other types of biomass and waste. And because these materials are abundant, cellulosic ethanol has the potential to replace a significant portion of our nation's petroleum consumption. The challenge comes, however, because unlike corn, These cellulosic materials are made of much more complex starches that are much harder to break down into ethanol. To make the promise of cellulosic ethanol a reality, we need to develop the enzymes and the microorganisms that could break them down and ferment these more complex starches. And that's where this innovation pipeline comes in. At the NREL in Colorado, scientists started at this most basic science step here. Basic science is very fundamental. It's the study of the elementary principles of the universe, really discovery-level science. So, for example, in this application, enzymes are large biological molecules. They are nature's catalysts. They accelerate the metabolic processes that sustain life. And to develop new customized enzymes and microorganisms capable of converting starchy biomass into cellulosic ethanol, you have to start at the very fundamentals of biochemistry and of biology. This includes studying intricate details of the relevant processes, the biochemical processes, as well as probing the proteins and the amino acids that form the building blocks of these enzymes down to the submolecular level. At this point, scientists, having made a series of discoveries, can then move to the applied science stage. Applied science concerns translating these fundamental discoveries into an application. In this example, scientists apply the insights gained from fundamental science research to develop new enzymes with desired performance traits, such as high selectivity, specificity, and stability, to enable effective and efficient conversion of these complex starches into ethanol. Applied research can also involve controlled lab-scale demonstrations to test and to demonstrate how effectively these newly developed enzymes and microorganisms can turn wood chips into ethanol. Still in the lab and very far from commercial scale, the kinds of small discoveries that happen at the applied science level act as an early demonstration that something new, the application of a new discovery, can possibly move further down this pipeline. At the applied research stage, we are still far away from creating something ready for the market. But between these two stages, our scientists have gone from basic science of how an idea might work to actually demonstrating it could work in practice. At this point now, the private sector is much more likely to see the potential value of this discovery. Scientists have shown it's possible, and next we move to the commercialization and then the scaling and deployment phases, where private investors and private companies take the technology of our national lab scientists and make it into a product that can succeed in the market. During the applied research stage at NREL, scientists were hard at work showing they really could produce cellulosic ethanol efficiently and cheaply, eventually meeting their goal to make it price competitive with conventional fuels in the commercial marketplace. That's where we are right now with cellulosic ethanol. Companies across the country, such as DuPont from my own home state of Delaware, Poet from other places in the country, and many others are currently actually building plants. They are doing the scaling and deployment. They're building plants to produce cellulosic ethanol at commercial scale and competitive prices. So this example is just one model of public-private partnership for innovation and how it works all along this innovation pipeline, where the basic and applied science research begin in a national lab and then are transferred either by the licensing or sale of intellectual property to private sector companies who then do the very hard work of commercialization and scaling before ultimate delivery to the marketplace where it can be bought and consumed by Americans and others around the world. I had the opportunity last year to witness another model of public-private partnership for innovation at a different national lab, at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is home to a unique national asset, the Advanced Light Source, or ALS. The ALS is a very complex, very expensive piece of machinery that serves thousands of researchers, from private sector scientists to university researchers, who use the light sources, such as ultraviolet rays, soft X-rays, and infrared light that all come off of the ALS, to conduct a wide range of scientific experiments. Experiments at the ALS are performed at nearly 40 different beam lines that come off the synchrotron and can operate simultaneously around the clock and year-round. This facility's remarkable resources would be far too expensive for any one company or university to invest in alone, but by building a national-level, publicly owned facility, it's then possible for it to function and to be partly sustained by fees and targeted infrastructure investments by users. And as a result, the ALS has become a place where many different partners from around our country and the world test new ideas and new approaches. In terms of this innovation pipeline, what the Berkeley Lab and ALS do is allow a very wide range of researchers to engage in different stages of research under one roof. The unique capabilities offered by the ALS attract many industry partners and encourages productive public-private collaboration. A good example of how this is actually applied into the marketplace is in the semiconductor industry. Semiconductor technology is one of the most transformative scientific breakthroughs of the last century. Semiconductors are at the heart of what makes a modern computer work. Their constant advancement is what allows us to today hold the computing power of last-generation supercomputer in iPhones in our pockets. However, the manufacturing techniques previously used to produce new, smaller, more powerful semiconductor products just aren't adequate to build the next generation of nanoelectronic devices. So what's happened is a consortium of companies, Intel, IBM, HP, Dow, formed a consortium called Semitech to leverage the unique capabilities of the ALS at the Berkeley lab to advance semiconductor manufacturing for next-generation electronics. As the lab reports, by tapping into the center's long-term expertise in short wavelength optics and the unique properties of the ALS synchrotron facility, Semitech funded the development of the world's highest resolution projection lithography tool and highest performance extreme ultraviolet microscope, developments only possible because of the facilities and the expertise at this unique national lab. Having then developed these new tools capable of manufacturing the next generation of semiconductor devices, a company like Intel can take that new technology and scale it up at their own plants. Of course, there's many different variations, like these two I've suggested, of public-private partnerships that our labs can and have utilized to take ideas from basic science all the way out to the marketplace. These two examples, cellulosic ethanol and semiconductor manufacturing, show us what's really possible when the private sector is able to work in full partnership with our national labs. In the bill we've introduced here today, Senator Rubio and I are trying to expand the flexibility and freedom of all our national labs to innovate and to build productive partnerships so that every research project has the potential and opportunity to travel this entire pipeline and be deployed to the world markets. As we see here on the innovation pipeline, the payoff for all this work doesn't come until the very end. So one of the best things we can do together is to focus our policies to make the movement of ideas through this, from the national labs to private sector partners to the marketplace, as efficient and predictable as possible. Mr. President, while there are many ideas, many areas, many political subjects on which Senator Rubio and I disagree, I'm pleased that we've been able to work hard and to come together on the America Innovates Act today, because we both agree that government has a role to play investing in fundamental scientific research that can lead to innovations that change our world. In this bill, we're not talking about expanding government or calling for any new spending or new regulation. We're talking about the early science work that only government can fund, because there isn't a clear payoff for the private sector, and figuring out how to connect the national labs and the private sector along this innovation pipeline in a better and stronger way to deliver more products to the American marketplace and the world markets. Once again, I want to thank my Republican colleague, Senator Marco Rubio, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join us in supporting this bipartisan innovation jobs bill. Thank you. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.